So very, very welcome to each one present. And lastly, also very welcome to various members of the Stellenbosch broader community who are here today. We are gathered to remove the Verwoerd plaque from this building. This building has been renamed some years ago, so the act of removing the plaque is highly appropriate. This act is, in some sense, a vulnerable one. It can, for instance, be described as too little, too late. It is also vulnerable in the sense that it might be interpreted as an act of non-tolerance and vengeance, an act of stigmatization and demonization of a historical period and persons. The removal of this plaque, however, takes place in the context of the journey of Stellenbosch University. Stellenbosch University is a university that is on an exciting journey of renewal and transformation, a journey from exclusion to inclusion, a journey from diverse and apart to diverse and together, a journey towards excellence, specifically excellence through inclusivity, excellence through diversity, a journey of access and a journey of joint ownership of this institution, ownership by all who live in it, a journey of future orientedness, a journey of liberating and healing impact on all walks of life in African societies. The act of removing this plaque serves as a confirmation of our commitment to this journey. This act confirms our commitment afresh. This act confirms our fragile and not perfect quest to concretely embody what we commit ourselves to. Dit is hoekom ons hier saam is. Die seremonie sal nie lank duur nie. I shall firstly invite Dr. Wilhelm Verwoerd, grandson of Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd. He will address us. Thereafter, the Stellenbosch University Brass Ensemble will render an item. Then I shall call on two students to address us. And thereafter, we shall move to the foyer, where the rector, representatives of students, and representatives of the Stellenbosch community will dislodge the plaque from its current position and put a South African flag in its place as a symbol of our unity in diversity. The rector will then read an official declaration, and thereafter we shall unite in singing the national anthem. Finally, there will be an opportunity for everyone present to sign the declaration. We will, in the course of the program, make one specific switch, which I will announce when we get to that point. But it is now, first of all, my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Wilhelm Verwoerd. Wilhelm is a former Chancellor's medal-winning student of Stellenbosch University. He is also a former lecturer of this university. As part of his commitment to reconciliation, being a white Afrikaner, grandson of Hendrik Verwoerd, he joined the ANC in the early 1990s. Later, he served as a researcher within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Between 2001 and 2012, he worked as a peace facilitator in Northern Ireland. He is currently a director of Beyond Walls, leading an international Beyond Dehumanization research project aimed at gathering practical wisdom from experienced reconciliation practitioners and former combatants and survivors in Northern Ireland, South Africa, Israel, Palestine, and the USA. He is also a research associate of the discipline group of practical theology in the Faculty of Theology here at Stellenbosch University. Willem, ons is baie bly dat jy hier is en stel jou graag aan die woord.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for everybody who's turned up. I've been asked to say something from a personal perspective, and I think I'll stick to what I've written, given the sensitivity of the material. Salve or salt, to transform or transmit historical pain. Sout of salve, om verwonding te verwerk of voort te sit. During the early 1980s, as a student at this university, I regularly walked past this building. I often looked up and saw written in large, bold letters in a place of honor above the main entrance, the familiar name HF Verwoerd. In those years, this kind of public honoring was commonplace. Schools, streets, government buildings, an airport, a large dam, and even a city were named after this prominent political figure. Al het hoë verwagtinge soms swaar geweeg, was ek as kind, skolier en student op Stellenbosch trots om met hom geassosieer te wees. Dr. HF Verwoerd was immers nie net 'n voormalige eerste minister nie, hy was ook 'n geliefde oupa Hendrik. Even though I sometimes struggled with high expectations attached to my surname, as a young person I was happy and proud to be associated with this name. After all, for me, HF Verwoerd was not only a former prime minister, he was also a beloved grandfather Hendrik. During those years, and I know it's difficult for some of the younger people here to even imagine this, but during those years, and sometimes even today, upon hearing my surname, random Afrikaner ooms and tannies would share their memories of what they saw as a great volksleier, as somebody who liberated his people from English domination. Typically, the respect, or rather reverence, in their voices was tangible. These reminiscences would usually end on a sad note, with a detailed recollection of where they were on that dark September day of shock and sorrow in 1966, when Dr. Verwoerd was assassinated in Parliament. From 1986 till 1990, I studied in Holland and England. This became a time of unexpected exposure to separate development, as experienced outside the seductive bubble of white Afrikaner middle-class Stellenbosch. For the first time, I was really and repeatedly confronted with the heart-rending life stories of fellow South Africans, fellow Christians, who happened to have a different skin color. I could not recognize Dr. Verwoerd and Opa Hendrik in their experiences of Verwoerd, the man of granite, as Chief Lutuli said, the one person who would be remembered as the author of our calamity. Yet again, my surname elicited spontaneous reactions. But this time, I was greeted with stories clothed in anger and profound pain. This time, that fateful September day, was not a day of sorrow, but to me, a shocking day of dancing and liberation. A handful of confusing years followed. Intense years of trying to understand with my head and my heart and my soul the real human story behind that day of dancing, without denying the day of mourning. Gradually, I came to the conclusion that the vast gulf between intentions and consequences, between most Afrikaners' historical self-understanding and the experiences of the majority of fellow South Africans, the gap between Oupa Hendrik and the architect of apartheid, will most likely remain unbridgeable. Hesitantly, reluctantly, I realized if I wanted to be true to my faith and to myself, that I needed to give priority to the pain of those who experienced him as the personification of a humiliating, dehumanizing political system. Struggling and haunted by the fear of betraying my folk and my father and my fathers, in the early 1990s, I at last accepted that my faith required deep journeying, a journey of the heart, beyond boundaries of belonging, in the footsteps of cross-border compassion, a hands-on journey of shared responsibility for the pain of apartheid, and a lifelong commitment to genuine reconciliation. Gekwel deur vrees vir volks- en vadersverraad, het ek uiteindelik in die vroeg 90 jare aanvaar dat my geloof 'n groot trek vereis, 'n hartsreis deur die bande van geborgenheid, in die voetspore van oorgrensmedelee, 'n handepad, 'n pad van medeverantwoordelikheid vir die pyn van apartheid en 'n lewensverbintenis tot ware versoening. I therefore advocated in the early 1990s, while being a lecturer in philosophy at this university, that names associated with the pain of apartheid, including HF Verwoerd, should no longer be honored in public shared spaces. I became convinced that this kind of honoring adds insult to injury. My worst fears came true when this belief was indeed interpreted as betrayal. Okay, so now we have reached May 2015. At last, the reduced remainder of the public honoring of HF Verwoerd in an increasingly diverse public space is symbolically removed. Even though I trusted that this would be a respectful ceremony in which care is taken to avoid the pitfall of retaliatory humiliation. In preparing for this event, I was surprised by the intensity of conflicting emotions and inner questioning. About 2.5 years ago, I returned to South Africa after more than a decade of practicing reconciliation in other troubled parts of the world, especially Northern Ireland. Shaped by this extended experience of facilitating inclusive storytelling and dialogue among and between former combatants and survivors from across the political spectrum in that country, I find myself struggling again with the meaning of reconciliation. What does true reconciliation in South Africa today really involve for a 51-year-old white heterosexual male from an Afrikaner middle-class background with the surname Verwoerd and somebody who dares to call himself a Christian? Although it is almost half a century since that September day of separate sorrow and joy, I am grappling again with this question. How can I make unifying room for Verwoerd as the symbol of apartheid and Oupa Hendrik within my growing commitment to radical, humanizing inclusivity? Al is dit amper 'n halfuur na daardie Septemberdag van aparte rou en blydskap, worstel ek opnuut met hierdie vraag. Hoe maak ek verenigende ruimte vir verwoerd as simbool van apartheid en oupa Hendrik binne my groeiende verbintenis tot radikale vermenslikende inklusiwiteit? Where do my 85-year-old parents and their Afrikaner friends fit into this picture? As I get older, my love of family is increasing. My youthful inclination to confident condemnation of the sins of the fathers is lessening. My empathy is deepening for their transmitted pain, especially from the distant times of what they call the Boer War and the more recent border war. My understanding is maturing of their generation's struggle to make sense of contemporary South Africa, including my participation in this ceremony. What about my children and their fellow members of the post-1994 generation? How can I contribute to translating their understandable resistance to paying for the pain of apartheid into a creative, liberating sense of a shared ability to respond? Obviously, I would like to say much more about that, but I'll stick to the text. And my contemporaries, especially in white Afrikaner circles, how do I productively distinguish between genuine political disillusionment and reasonable blame fatigue? How do I distinguish that from avoidance of responsibility as ongoing beneficiaries of systematic, unjust, historical privileging? However, the most daunting question continues to be, how do I listen, really listen to the heartbeat of the untransformed pain behind the clenched fists and the bubbling anger of mostly black fellow citizens? How can I play a positive role with regard to the deeply rooted, unhealed, emotional, moral, and soul injuries from our apartheid past? Die grootste vraag bly egter steeds. Hoe hoor ek regtig die hartklop van pyn agter die gebalde vuiste en borrelende woede van hoofsaaklik swart landsgenote? Hoe kan ek 'n positiewe rol speel ten opsigte van veral die diepgewortelde, ongeneesde, emosionele, morele en sielsverwonding van die verlede? Of course, I cannot and should not respond to these questions by myself. I've come to appreciate that the only road forward is for me to remain committed to sincere, humble, patient, cross-border relational journeying. I'm acutely aware of the daily temptation to protect my own vulnerability, rather than to take up my cross, to open myself to the discomfort, the deconditioning, and the resurrection of cross-cutting compassion. What I can do is today again to make a choice, in public, as a verwoerd, for salve instead of salt. Deep listening gave my gut a glimpse of the wounding that those on the receiving end of apartheid associate with the name verwoerd. The urgent heartbeat behind those clenched fists brought home to me their profound hunger for sincere acknowledgement by those who share responsibility for their woundedness. The irony is that it actually was black South Africans, despite the pain woven into verwoerd, who encouraged me never to reject Oupa Hendrik. In our culture, they told me, we respect our ancestors. I also remember a striking conversation with Walter Sisulu, in which he warned against placing too much emphasis on an individual such as Verwoerd, given the systemic injustices of apartheid and colonialism. At the same time, people such as Pumla and Temba and Naledi helped me to understand that to honor HF Verwoerd as a political leader is to rub salt into their wounds. To realize that this salt of inadequate acknowledgement does not easily lose its potency, nor is it restricted to a particular place or time or generation. This salt of insult added to injury indeed helps me to make some sense of how historical woundedness is transmitted even beyond the biblical third and fourth generations. My sincere hope is therefore that this ceremonial full stop behind the public honoring of painful apartheid symbols at the University of Stellenbosch will indeed convey a much needed message of acknowledgement, that the removal of this verwoerd plaque will thus come to play a small but significant healing role within the wider South African society. Ek hoop daarom opreg dat hierdie seremoniële beëindiging van die verering van pynlike apartheid simbole aan hierdie universiteit 'n broodnodige boodskap van menslike erkenntnis sal oordra. Dat die verwydering van die verwoerd plaket sodoende 'n klein maar beduidende helende rol sal vervul binne die breëre Suid-Afrikaanse gemeenskap. For how long would someone like me be faced with a choice between the salt of silence, indifference, or exclusive ethnic remembrance, and the salve of humble, humanizing acknowledgement? Again, it's not appropriate for me to answer this kind of question, though I find 70 times 7 to be a wise guideline. This is ultimately why I accepted the invitation to participate in this ceremony, even though it is only taking place in May 2015. However, I've also been helped to realize that it's not the quantity, but the quality of acknowledgement that really counts. Fake salve burns even more than salt. I therefore remain very aware that for a symbolic choice to become salve rather than salt, it requires ongoing, tangible transformation of pain from our past. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, comrades, this moment is very significant in many of our lives, and it doesn't just represent the end of transformation. It doesn't represent the achievement of transformation in itself. But what this moment does represent is the beginning of the current South Africa creating an environment that does not highlight oppression, that does not tolerate injustices, but that takes a stand against the glorification of injustices against human beings. This moment represents the necessary consciousness that our country currently lacks. It represents an understanding of pain and of suffering and a commitment to uphold this consciousness. When I told my grandmother that I was invited to speak today, her immediate reaction was one of fear and panic. And she said to me, "You know, that plaque should not be there because it was that same regime that oppressed us. It was that same regime that caused me, you, your mother, my family, indescribable pain. My child, I don't want you to speak at this event. People will hurt you because they don't understand and they may try to threaten your life." I was quite surprised and taken aback by my grandmother's comment. And when she used phrases like "Nkosi yam, Jesu," I knew that this was serious for her. I then asked her what she meant, and I needed her to clarify on these feelings she had. And she then said to me, "The problem in South Africa is that people still think that a statue or a plaque represents your culture. People still think that apartheid and racism are over when it isn't." I've pondered on the words of my grandmother, and I understand her fears. I understand her pain. You see, apartheid as a legislation is no more, but our minds are enslaved. Our minds are still oppressed, and that's a problem that we face. What we need to understand is that we need to free our minds to begin to realize one another. We need to free our minds to begin to recognize that an exclusionary society has no place in the context of South Africa. Professor Keert inspired me the other day with his thoughts. He said to me, "In actual fact, we are all guilty for the current state of our nation. Every single one of us is guilty. And how is it in that way? We are guilty for not wanting to understand one another. We are guilty for refusing to change our mindsets and our societal values when we know that it's these very same values that oppress other students on our campus. And we are guilty in the sense that we choose to devalue the lives of others simply for the sake of upholding our families." Albert Einstein once said that the world, as we have created it, is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed unless we change our thinking. So to start this understanding, I feel that we need to look at many myths amongst our students, our communities, and amongst our governments. And we need to destroy these myths for us to move forward from today's event, so that today isn't simply the removal, but that it's a greater change for our nation. Firstly, this myth that you destroy your culture when you remove symbols. Your culture is not enshrined in a statue or a plaque. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a statue is a carved or cast figure of a person or animal, and a plaque is an ornamental object that is fixed to a wall or surface in commemoration of a person. Nowhere in any of these definitions does it mention culture. And the reason is because your culture is not represented in an inanimate object. In fact, a culture refers to ideas, customs, societal norms, and behavior of a particular people and a society. You carry your culture. I carry my culture. When I sing songs of praise and I ululate down the streets of Victoria, that is me as a Zulu girl representing what I stand for. The second myth that we need to deal with is this myth that things are fine the way they are, so why change it? For me, that's the biggest problem on this campus, in the sense that people feel that if it's not broken, don't fix it. But the true reality is that it is broken on the surface level, and with our minimal human interaction with one another on campus, it appears that things are not broken. But the sad reality is that it's not fine. Using phrases like inclusivity and diversity does not automatically transform an institution. We need to understand that the effects of the past are a lot deeper rooted, and many people feel that because we're the new generation, we don't feel these effects anymore. But we can see Bantu education that denied millions of Black South Africans of a decent education. And in fact, this system taught many South Africans to learn skills for Bantu people, to be equipped for Bantu jobs. And that has resulted in us having a South Africa today where we've got widening gaps between rich and poor, unskilled labor, and many unemployed people. As citizens, we need to learn to look at the ramifications of the decisions made by our governments. Visual remnants of the regime are not progressive for the South Africa that we want to create. We need to create our own stronger history. We need to emerge stronger, and we do this by analyzing the wrongs of our past leaders and making decisions to uplift our nation as a whole. The third myth that we need to destroy is a student mentality that it doesn't affect me, so I'm not involved, or it doesn't happen. This is a negative mentality that we have, especially as South Africans. We need to free our minds from this self-centered way of thinking. Just because something doesn't affect me does not mean that it's not happening. Edmund Burke once said that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We need to teach ourselves to seek humanity in all cases, treat each other as ends in themselves instead of means to an ends, analyzing deeper that what may not affect you affects another person, and that recognition is crucial for any transformation. Thirdly, and this last myth, is that this myth of can't we all just tolerate one another and represent the human race? Tolerance is what is causing the demise of this human race. Tolerance is causing the demise of our society. When you tolerate someone, you don't understand them, you don't engage with them, you talk at them, and you don't listen to them. I say no to tolerance. What we need is understanding. Understanding is what will eventually result in us becoming this ideal human race that we aim to be. We need to condition our minds to want to understand the actions, the words, the circumstances of other people, and through that we will achieve enlightenment and consciousness. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a good day. Today is a good day. It's a long overdue day, but it's a good day. This day represents the day that Stellenbosch University chooses humanity with an element of understanding. As a nation and as an institution, we need to distance ourselves from apartheid morality. We cannot preach inclusivity and yet have non-inclusive remnants in and around our campus. I picture the late Prof Russell Botman sitting and rejoicing at this very moment for this very event that's taking place right here. I urge all members of management, staff, students, community members, and government officials, free your minds of the oppression that it faces. Ignorant thinking is not freedom, and you are not entitled to an opinion. You are entitled to an informed opinion. Let this removal of this plaque represent a South Africa that is committed to remove symbols that no longer have a place in this nation of equality that we want to achieve. I'd like to acknowledge who the media refers to as the Verwoerd that toy-toyed. This is Dr. Willem Verwoerd, who's, as he mentioned earlier on, the grandson of Hendrik Verwoerd. Now, he discussed his accomplishments and the various things that he achieved and how he joined the ANC and was even accused of betraying his family. But I see this as the epitome of consciousness, an enlightened South African. You need to betray your family if your family is telling you to exclude other people. And that is how we achieve transformation. We can't simply tolerate, we need to understand and we need to seek consciousness. And I urge everyone here to have a conversation with Dr. Willem Verwoerd to understand the sacrifices that must be made for humanity and what is right. Furthermore, I personally cannot comprehend carrying such burdens on my shoulders based on the actions of my family members and their injustices. And I encourage every single person here to alleviate the future generations of this burden by actively seeking to achieve human rights and justice now, not tomorrow, now. I leave you with this final thought. When I was 18, my grandfather gave me a stack of newspaper cutouts that he started saving since my mother's teenage years. These articles refer to the apartheid regime, the injustices, the pain, the fight for freedom by both whites and non-whites, and leaders who emerged. He said to me, "This is your history. Now how will you ensure its realization and add your chapter?" And I pose that very same question to everyone here. We are aware of our history. How will we each individually ensure that this removal of the Verwoerd plaque is not the only way of unifying and bettering our nation, and that transformation in this university and in our country does not stop here? Thank you.
Today is a momentous day. It is a monumental day. A day worth remembering and a day with great significance. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are not just removing a plaque which honors the president from our less than perfect past. We are erecting a new monument. A monument which bears testimony to how far we have come as a society, yet at the same time indicates the long road that lies ahead of us. As the citizens of this country, we are caught in a unique position. On the one hand, we have a nation with the brightest of futures. Despite the grim picture the media often paints, there are still many signs of hope. This is a land of opportunity, and we have the means to turn it around and turn it into something great. South Africa will once again be the breadbasket of Africa. However, on the other hand, we also have our sordid apartheid history. A history riddled with the bullet holes of oppression and subjugation which has caused immense pain. Quite a contrast which frames the following questions. To whom does it all belong? Who gets what? Who takes the future and who takes the past? Who won and who lost? Who should cry about our past and laugh about our future? And who should be angry and who should be happy? There's one simple answer to all of these questions, and it is all of us. South Africa belongs to those who live in it. This is our country, and together we should take ownership of it. We should take ownership of our past and acknowledge our injustices. We should take ownership of our present, as we are doing here today, to ensure that our future will not look like our past. Now, in a moment such as this, unity is paramount, to ensure that no one gets left behind as we progress. Today, we should also seek to acknowledge the strides which have been taken in creating a more inclusive society. The removal or changing of certain elements on campus to engender a more welcoming atmosphere for all should be celebrated. The acceptance of the role that all of us have yet to play in creating such a space should also be encouraged. In recent times, this has been no more evident than in 2012 when the primarius of Dagbreek at the time, Pieter Nel, apologized on behalf of his house for its involvement in the Battle of Andringa Street in 1939, as well as the role it played in the formation period of apartheid, especially having housed both Verwoerd and Foster whilst they studied at this university. Even though the approach to transformation after this event has been perceived as being staggered, it definitely set the process at least in motion. That act in itself was a monument erected to symbolize the steps we should take to break down the barriers erected in our past, which still come between us. It was a conscious decision to acknowledge the past and to start looking for ways in which the process of reconciliation could be furthered. After our celebration of unity here today, our greatest challenges are ever yet to come. Will the removal of a bronze plaque from a concrete wall tie us all together? Is what we are doing here today going to guarantee a more inclusive and welcoming environment which will grant us all a sense of belonging? Essentially, this is what we should be aiming for. But in order for this ideal to be realized, we should first remove the bronze plaques which we have placed over our own hearts. We have to ask ourselves what it is we cling to, why we cling to it, and what the effects are of clinging, what the effects are on our community of clinging to this. The removal of the Verwoerd plaque will mean nothing if we don't remove the plaques of apartheid from our hearts as well. We cannot hope for a bright future if we cling to a dark past. This does not mean that we should forget about our past. It only means that our past should not steer us into the future. It should be a monument, stationary, a reminder of who we used to be but aren't anymore. The hope of a bright future should always be the driving force. Today, we have to make a conscious decision to build. We have to keep on building monuments, such as the one we are building here today in remembrance of where we are heading, but also to remind us of where we have come from. It is our responsibility to remember that whilst we are building these monuments, we are also building our nation. We are building on the solid foundation which Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk have laid for us. We are moving forwards and we are moving upwards. We are the co-owners of this nation's future. Let us make it a better one for all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Goeiemiddag. So thank you all for being here today to witness this moment in our institution's history. Our students and staff, council members, alumni, and members of the broader community. And I really want to thank all the speakers who spoke before me sincerely. You have given us much, much food for thought with your insights. I will now read out a statement drawn up to capture today's events, and I invite all of you to sign this statement after we have sung the national anthem. But before I do so, I want to reiterate that Stellenbosch University is serious about transformation, which is integral to education. On the one hand, transformation means addressing and redressing what was wrong in the past. But on the other hand, it means building a better future for all. We should always go forward. Sometimes the road will be clear and the journey smooth. Other times, the road will be bumpy and the going tough. But that's okay. Change is never easy. But the most important thing is to keep talking to each other. And as I said at my inauguration, we need an open discussion, a conversation without borders about the future we need to build. And I'm glad this circulation of ideas has started. And everyone who makes a contribution is playing an important role. I have received a memorandum from Open Stellenbosch, a list of recommendations from the FSRC, and a number of inputs from other important stakeholders, and we are preparing a response to this. Obviously, all conversations must take place in a spirit of understanding and mutual respect. But let the discussion continue, no matter how difficult. We are removing something from the past today. Now let us work together to put in place the building blocks for the future that we want for our university. Let us talk and walk the walk of inclusivity together. And I now read this statement on behalf of everyone gathered here. The removal of the Verwoerd commemorative plaque from the Accounting and Statistics Building, formerly known as the HF Verwoerd Building, illustrates the commitment of Stellenbosch University to create a welcoming campus for all and to remove obstacles in the path of unity and progress. This event serves as an affirmation of the university's acknowledgement of its contribution to the injustices of the past and its commitment to redress and development in its strategic framework of 2000. We, the witnesses of today's event, undertake to remind our campus and town community of where we come from and where we are heading with our democracy in our country as well as an institution. Die verwydering van die verwoerd gedenkplaat uit die rekeningkunde en statistiekgebou, voorheen bekend as die HF Verwoerd gebou, illustreer die Universiteit Stellenbosch se erns om 'n verwelkomende kampus vir almal te skep en om struikelblokke in die pad van samehorigheid en vooruitgang te verwyder. Die geleentheid herbevestig die universiteit se erkenning in sy strategiese raamwerk van 2000 van sy bydrae tot die ongeregtighede van die verlede en sy verbintenis tot regstelling en ontwikkeling. Ons, die getuies van vandag se geleentheid, onderneem om ons kampus en dorpsgemeenskap te herinner aan waar ons vandaan kom en waarheen ons op pad is met ons demokrasie. In ons land, sowel as ons instelling. Baie dankie. Thank you.
We just want to say the two persons who removed the plaque, on the one hand our rector and on the other hand Mr. Willie Ortel, one of the beloved persons of the Stellenbosch community, a former mayor and somebody who suffered intensely under apartheid. So it's so great that Mr. Willie Ortel could participate. And we now give opportunity to our students, the two students who spoke, Farai and Stefan. They will put something new on here, the South African flag, to say we are united in our diversity.